It's the unexpected showdown in the Big Ten in Columbus, of course, with Ohio State taking on undefeated Indiana. 9-1 for the Buckeyes. That's pretty much standard. That's been stated a few thousand times throughout history. But 10-0 Indiana, that has never been stated in the history of college football. So it should be quite the showdown in Columbus. Of course, this is our Buckeye show that we present each and every Wednesday. Appreciate you stopping by. Comments and questions are welcome. Please support the show, the channel. The super chat is available for you. Steve Hellwagon right next to me. Bucknuts247 Sports. Tony Gerdeman with the BuckeyeHuddle.com. Buckeye Weekly is the podcast just released moments ago. So get on over there as soon as we're done. Check out Tony's work with the Buckeye Weekly podcast. Guys, how we doing?
Doing good.
Doing well.
Unfortunately, Seth McLaughlin not doing well. The Achilles tear means he's done for the season. And he had, Steve, a heck of a first half plus this season, 10 out of 12 games at this point. Mid-season All-America, according to the AP and Sporting News, 34 starts at center. That's basically impossible to replace, but the Buckeyes are going to have to do their best to shuffle things around.
Yeah, it's really a sad story on a number of fronts. Seth McLaughlin came in from Alabama and in a lot of ways made that offensive line his, and he was the leader. He and Donovan Jackson, obviously the top returning player at guard. And by and large, the offensive line, other than a game or two, played pretty well throughout the course of the season, withstood the injury to Josh Simmons at left tackle. They had to move things around a little bit. And I think there was a lot of sentiment that Seth McLaughlin was a first-team All-Big Ten guy, potentially an All-American, and possibly even the Remington Award winner as the nation's top center. And sometimes it's crazy the way these things work. The voting for this will come down here at the end of the regular season, only a couple more games left. And, sometimes you'll get the sympathy vote in a situation like this. And wouldn't surprise me if he up and wins it now that his season is over, because he had 10 pretty good games at Ohio State. And the two plays that I will go back to that really typified his impact and the way that this team, this offensive line, kind of rallied with him as the leader was the quarterback sneak from the 1 yard line off the goal line at Penn State, where they shoved everybody forward 4 yards to the 5 yard line, and they all picked each other up. And obviously he's the center, and he's the tip of the spear, shoving, guys backward. And then the other one was just this past Saturday at Northwestern. I forget if it was the first or the second. I think it was the second touchdown that Quinshon Judkins scored. I think his first one was over right guard. I think his second one, he went in behind the left side of Seth McLaughlin, I believe. And Seth turned his guy and dumped him on the ground like that, and then stood over him as Quinshon Judkins scored in behind him, and defiantly let the guy know that we just scored a touchdown on your ass, bleep, 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 or whatever the kids say these days. So I'm watching that all transpire through my binoculars. I'm like, Seth's giving this guy the business down there at the, in the goal line. But at any rate, just a dominant, force, it felt like, on a team that needed a dominant force. and that can't be understated, given the lack of physicality, toughness, whatever that intangible is that Ohio State's offensive line didn't seem to have in the big games in recent years. That guy delivered it in spades, and he will be sorely missed. I think that is definitely the case, and I know we'll get into all the permutations and, who's going to go here and here and here and here, but this is a major blow for Ohio State. It's not a crippling blow, but it is a major blow along the lines of losing Josh Simmons earlier in the season.
Did you catch that, Tony? Permutations out of you. Carson Hinsman, Josh Padilla, of course, was the guy that stepped in with the rest of the backups last week.
Yeah, From what I'm told, it'll be Carson Hinsman at center and Austin Sierveld at left guard moving forward. But with losing Seth, he was the leader of the offensive line, and that's a credit to him coming in and earning that spot as the center, but also as the veteran who has seen so many different things and was able to communicate so many different things off the field and on the field, was able to help Carson Hinsman along and perhaps help get him ready for left guard and also get him ready for what is going to happen here at center. So he's been the consummate teammate. He's exactly the kind of guy they were looking for in the portal. They vet their transfers. They don't just bring guys in. And you're seeing that with the leadership of Seth, of Caleb Downs, of
Will Howard,
Quinshawn Judkins, and Will Howard. That Ryan Day even talked about it on Tuesday, and then to have this happen. So, he'll be now, and I just talked about it in the latest episode of the Buckeye Weekly podcast. He's going to be the most in the nation for the next however many games, because he's going to be involved and he's going to be watching film. He's going to be getting people ready. So sucks for him, because he had moved from, some would say, an undrafted free agent to a middle round guy based on his play this season. And this doesn't mean he's not going to get drafted or that he won't play in the NFL. It's just it's a setback. It's unfortunate, but it's not going to stop him. He'll keep going. And so will Ohio State. It's next man up. They've done it before. They'll do it again. And you look over the nation, the last couple of national champions. I'll go back even further after we're done here and see how often. You saw Michigan lose Zach Zinter last year. You saw Georgia lose offensive lineman the year before. It just happens. And I wrote about it last night on the Buckeye Huddle message board, that people don't realize how often offensive linemen go down for national championship teams or major teams, because there's 5 of them and there's 5 more waiting in the wings, and you just plug guys in and you have to go. You just have to keep going. So this is unfortunate for Ohio State. It is not unique to Ohio State, and they'll pick up, they'll move pieces together, and you'd be hard pressed to find a team that can replace their starting center with last year's starting center and replace the current left guard with the opening day left guard, which is what Ohio State will be able to do. Now you got to go out there and put it together against the best defensive lines you're going to face all year long, the rest of the way out.
Yeah, definitely guys in play that have done it before and had reps and in meaningful games against meaningful teams. So there is that, but my goodness, just tough to see and tough to take for him personally, but also the impact on this team at the one position that seems to be the most vulnerable.
Well, even when we talked about who could you not afford to lose, the first answer was Josh Simmons. And then for like Gallows humor, it's like, well, what if they lost Seth McLaughlin? It's like, well, don't even bring that up, because that would be too much to bear. And it's a lot. And we could talk about it being just one guy. Now it's a second guy, and it's a significant person. And so this being Ohio State, they've got 16, 17 offensive linemen on scholarship. So you've got options. It's a team full of guards and centers. So you're looking for guards and centers right now. And if you can't find somebody, then that is that's on the fault of the position coaches not getting it done and not getting the recruiting, because other programs have been able to plug guys in. Ohio State has been able to plug guys in this year. And so now you got to do it again. And as I said, you're facing an Indiana defensive line that does a bunch of different stuff it's going to make life difficult on a new center. Then you've got Michigan, who has 2 defensive tackles that are going to be playing in the NFL next year. And then possibly if they win those 2 games, you're playing Oregon again, and they have NFL defensive linemen. And then it just goes on from there. And actually, maybe they'll get a break in the first couple of rounds, actually.
They may at that. Showdown against Indiana. Of course, the Hoosiers have rolled for the most part, but ran into Michigan a few weeks ago and proved to be vulnerable on the offensive side, especially in the second half. Didn't get much done. I counted up 25 plays and 18 yards for the Indiana offense in the second half against Michigan. They got some things done in the passing game early, hit Michigan with a couple deep shots to put themselves in position, and 17-3 lead. And that seems to be the most valid performance out there. The Nebraska has proven not to be much of a team. Washington's probably the second best team they've played, or Washington may be better than Michigan. Of course, they beat them head to head, and Indiana took care of them fairly easily. It was a semi-competitive game, but do we think that Indiana's got Ohio State's attention?
Definitely. And, I've kind of taken up their cause on Twitter. This week, there's this groundswell that, should when Indiana loses to Ohio State and beats Purdue and finishes 11-1, that Indiana should not be in the playoff. And instead, it should be one of the 2-loss SEC teams. And, I grant the fact that those teams have played more ranked opponents and probably a better schedule. But I guess I would come back and I could just say, look, Indiana's playing 9 conference games, 9 high major opponents. Granted, they didn't play anybody in the non-conference this year of note. So that's kind of a strike against them. But, the SEC teams, they kind of vary. Some of them play 8 high majors. Some of them play 9 high majors. And some of them do play 2 good non-conference opponents and play 10 high majors. It kind of varies school to school. So there's no one-size-fits-all answer to this. It's all apples to oranges comparisons. But I think if you go 11-1 as a member of one of the 2 major conferences right now and go 8-1 in that conference, I think it's kind of hard to keep you out of a 12-team playoff. I just, I get it. They didn't play Oregon. They're not going to play Penn State. I get it. Not going to play Illinois, who's also now ranked, it seems, as well. But, to me, I feel like you have to look. You have to put the tape on and watch them play. I mean, it's not like they're beating let's say, Purdue next week by 7 points or Northwestern by, a few points or whatever. They are on average beating everybody they've played by 30 points. They are dominant. I mean, they beat Nebraska 56-7. They have beaten these other teams in the Big Ten by wider margins than Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State have in some instances. And we are all regarding those 3 as legitimate. Now, I know margin of victory is not the end-all be-all, as my dog goes nuts. Stop it. We'll see if they listen. Margin of victory is not the end-all be-all, certainly. And it is, it doesn't mean everything. But in this case, it's one of the few barometers that we have. And the eyeball test suggests to us that this is a legitimate top 10 team. And regardless of the fact they don't have a pelt on the wall that said that they beat Penn State or beat a top 10 team or even beat a high major in the non-conference. Michigan, won the national championship last year without beating a high major in the non-conference. Ohio State likely to make the playoff this year without beating a high major in the non-conference. So, let's don't get bogged down in that. It's the overall body of work that I think you have to look at. And, let's just don't discount them. If they come into Ohio State and lose the game 31-21, then, which is about what the experts think it ought to be, then, how can you, put a black mark on them? If they come in and lose 40-3, then I think they've got a problem. That may be disqualifying at that point. But, I don't want to talk out of both sides of my mouth, but I do believe that this is a legitimate team, and I do believe Ohio State's in for a challenge now, especially without Seth McLaughlin.
Georgia is the only SEC team in those 1- and 2-loss SEC teams that is playing more Power 5, Power 4 opponents than Indiana. Everybody else is playing 9 or 8. I think everybody's playing 9. I'm not sure if there are a couple of 8s in there, maybe an Ole Miss, but they're all playing the same number of Power 4 teams, except for Georgia, who went above and beyond, mainly because they have a rivalry with Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
So that's we've seen plenty of programs play 10 over the years, and so I get that the SEC people are upset about Indiana not playing ranked opponents. and they talk about strength of schedule. Strength of schedule has nothing to do with how good you are. That's just a measurement of who you've played. It's not an indication of anything that you're doing on the field or how good you are or any kind of analytical or margin of victory or anything like that. So, yeah, the strength of schedule, it's going to get better here after this week, but it's a measurement of who you've played, not how you've played, what you've done in those games. So the committee is looking at what they've done, and they've done pretty well. Now, I think they were exposed a bit against Michigan. We saw Indiana capable of bleeding against Michigan, where the old Wolverines were a 2-point conversion away from tying that late in the game. And so to think that they're going to just blow everybody out by 2 scores or whatever, that's no longer the case. And they are, can't believe I'm saying this about Indiana. They are mortal. They are human, and they can be beaten. Now it's just up to Ohio State to do it. But yeah, I mean, they're playing 9 Power 4 opponents like most of the SEC. Now, the SEC's problem is too many of their good teams are losing. And so I don't know how that's Indiana's fault.
Yeah, so Indiana, of course, they win. All is good for them. If they lose, then there's going to be all sorts of evaluations, unless it's 45-3, all sorts of evaluations as to how they played and comparing 11-1 versus a pack of 10-2. And I know that the committee wedged Miami in the middle of that pack, but they still seem to kind of move together. Like they're almost inseparable based on their schedules, their records, them beating each other in various fashions. A beat B and B beat C, but C beat A. So they're going to kind of move around together. And if Indiana, if that final score moves into a 3-score range, and it could be a really good game for 3+ quarters, could be a 3-point game, and Ohio State tacks on 2 touchdowns and wins by 17. And suddenly that's a debatable, okay, was that a competitive game? Or did Ohio State just decide we're going to put our foot on the gas and Indiana's not that good? And so once they hit that SEC threshold, you just get this feeling they're going to drop below all of them, and then they're going to have moved in there, and then they're in trouble.
Yeah, I think, again, there's a lot of football that's left to be played, and let's not necessarily just assume that all these SEC teams are going to finish with 2 losses too. I think that, they all have 2 games remaining. So, could somebody jump up and clip one of these teams? I don't know. Obviously, you've got Texas and Texas A&M still lurking out there. The winner of that game is going to be in the SEC championship game, it appears, and the loser could be all the way out of the playoffs. So, it's going to get a little dicey here in the next few weeks, and people are going to spin things the way that they want. I was at the OSU basketball game, so I'm going to be very honest with you. I'm going to open ESPN.com right now and peruse the rankings. And, if you want to, I don't want the show to devolve completely into rankings talk, because I know, are we going to have somebody from Indiana on perhaps?
Yes.
Okay.
Weaver's slated to jump on here from 247.
Yeah, we want to talk about this game quite a bit too. But was there anything in last night's rankings that stood out for everybody?
Yeah, I think the only thing for me is that Georgia is trapped behind Ole Miss and Alabama, and it's going to remain that way as long as, Mark, as you said, like they're all just jumbled together. Those 2 teams have beaten Georgia, so I think they're in at this point. I think Tennessee is going to get if Indiana loses, then the discussion comes down to Indiana, and I think Tennessee as like that last team in. And Tennessee's loss to Arkansas, a blowout loss to Georgia, has not impressed the committee. Yes, they have their win over Alabama, but it's going to be an interesting discussion where do they value that one win more than 2 losses versus Indiana's best win being, as you say, Washington or whatever, and what could be a good loss. So then it becomes a 5 SEC versus 3 Big Ten teams, and that's another can of worms in there. But I think Georgia at this point is in, but I don't think they can jump either Alabama or Ole Miss since they've lost to them. And that head-to-head doesn't always matter, but it's mattering right now because once you've got a couple of losses, you kind of you lose the ability to narrate your own story there, and then the committee starts putting the story together for you, and it's hard for them to be jumbled in together and say, okay, Georgia, you're ahead of these two teams now, even though you've got the head-to-head on both of those.
Yeah, that's kind of see what you're saying as I open it up, and I see that they're kind of landlocked down there in that 10 range, much higher in the AP at number 8. The committee has really given Miami a lot of credence here at 9-1, and AP has them down at 11. So, I mean, that's a 3-spot difference there. So, I guess in some regards, the first 7 between AP and the playoff rankings are identical. So everyone seems to be in lockstep on them. But then, you get to 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and you could probably put those 5 or 6 teams in a fishbowl and draw them out. But it looks like ACC and Big 12 are only going to get their champion in at this point, the way it looks. And, no guarantee that Boise State may get in as one of the 4 protected conference champions if they went out ahead of the Big 12, which would be a major upset, I guess, if that's what happens. So, it's things are getting a little interesting down there, aren't they? So, and of course, the way they view it this week will be different than how they view it next week, which will be different than how they view it the following week, which will be different than how they view it on the decision day. So, that is a tradition unlike any other. the ability to change their world viewpoint week to week is a hallmark of this great process that we have put together. But as I'm cracking myself up thinking about how they're going to tap dance around all the different changes week to week, I saw one of the things that comes up on my Twitter was why they had Clemson ahead of South Carolina or vice versa. I'm like, well, God, they're going to solve that one on the field, I think, here in a week or two. Who gives a shit? Is kind of my feeling that, neither of those teams is really in the overall discussion. And that's just for moving the deck chairs, on the Titanic. That is completely immaterial who's ahead of the other one at this stage, because, they're going to play that one out. So, that's all just for more SEC bragging rights to, if South Carolina wins and they finish 15th or whatever, then yippee, we beat the number 15 team, or that loss to South Carolina. Boy, they're a good team, et cetera. So all that.
Don't forget Missouri. Missouri's a ranked team as well.
God. Good old
Yeah. I was taking that too and taking calls, and people picked on that. But, once I dove into it and then I looked at my own rankings and I thought I got them in the same place, and I made my rankings before the committees. And I'm like, who else is going to be in there? Because once you get you get a number of 3-loss teams at the bottom of your rankings, most likely. And then there are only 2 in my rankings. There are only 2 3-loss teams out of the top 25, and they're Duke and Syracuse. Yeah. And there's really nowhere else to go. I started looking at 6 and 4 teams, and there's nobody.
Somebody's got to fill the top 25.
Yeah. But you look at.
We had 23 teams this week.
That's about what it is right now.
Oh my gosh!
Bring back the top 20.
Bring back the top 20. Folks, we appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. We do this with Tony and with Steve each and every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And we're going to have some Indiana discussion here in just a second. So we might as well get the formalities out of the way. Tony, what's going on this week at Buckeye Huddle and Buckeye Weekly?
Well, I dropped a feature I do, what I know, what I think, what I wonder last night about the Seth McLaughlin injury and the fallout and where to move from here. And then we just released a podcast this morning on the Buckeye Huddle, the Buckeye Weekly podcast, talking about that as well. We will talk with Ryan Day tonight. I don't know that he'll be too forthcoming on what they plan to do, but with everybody running with the story, he's not going to be able to say there's nothing going on. So it'll be interesting to get his thoughts tonight, and we'll see how many players we talk to tonight as well. So we'll have all of that coverage at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We'll have a live show afterwards as well at YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle.
Steve, what's going on in Bucknuts?
A little of this and a little bit of that, but obviously it's Indiana week, exclamation point, and wink, wink, nod, nod, biggest game of the year. And no one saw this coming, obviously. I mean, you saw as Indiana kept winning games week after week that they're in the hunt. And the Big Ten did come out with a memorandum that said that Oregon has won all the tiebreakers, even if they lose a game somehow, lose to Washington here at the end. They are still going to go to the Big Ten championship game because they'd still win all the tiebreakers. And so, Ohio State, if they win out, would be in because they would win all the tiebreakers with Indiana and Penn State with head-to-head. So that's good. But, I look at it and I think about, Indiana is a team that Ohio State has just dominated over the years. I think it's 29 straight, I think is the number that they've won against Indiana, dating to a tie in 1990. And of course, they've played every year now since they've been together in division play. In recent years, they've played every year. So the rivalry goes back to 1901. And, Ohio State is something like 52-2-1 or something like that over the last 54, 55 meetings, whatever it is. So this is a rivalry. And again, this is kind of like the Purdue week I talked about a few weeks ago. Indiana did come into Ohio Stadium and beat the Buckeyes 31-10 in 1987. Earl Bruce called it our darkest day is what Earl Bruce called it. And of course, he would be out of a job a few weeks later. At the end of the 1987 season, but that would tell you that the depths that it would mean if Indiana were to come into Ohio Stadium and beat the Buckeyes. It's just unheard of, and yet I think this is only I want to say it's the first time in a regular season game Indiana will be in a top 5 matchup. I think their Rose Bowl in 1967 against USC, I think might have been a top 5 matchup. I'm not sure. And obviously they had a top 10 matchup in Columbus just 4 years ago with the Penix game where Ohio State was up 28-7 at halftime. And then Penix had an out of body experience there in the second half and just went off. And, they got it to 42-35. And I think they even had the ball after that with a chance to tie the game, and Ohio State held on. I think Ohio State's only touchdown in the second half may have been a pick 6 by Sean Wade. So, the Justin Fields offense kind of bogged down there in the second half a little bit. But, that was a thrilling game played in front of an empty stadium during COVID. And that was the Big Ten East Championship game, even though Ohio State was 3-0 and Indiana was 4-0. And Indiana had beaten Michigan and Penn State, or I don't know if they beat Michigan afterwards or before, but Indiana was 4-0. They were playing strictly a Big Ten schedule that year, so it was a unique year. But this guy, Curt Cignetti, he's a hard ass, a red ass. He's a real somebody. So, we're going to find out if he's always cracked up to be this Saturday, or if he's all hat and no cattle. We're going to find out one way or the other.
I think there's a lot of cattle with him, and he's been a successful head coach, and I like the attitude that he brings and the swagger that he uses to bolster the program, and then you can back it up. And so they've been able to back it up with their schedule. And they have no fear. They have no, as he said on, I think, Monday, confidence is not an issue that we have here. So they're very confident in what they're going to be able to do and what they've been able to do. This is going to be clearly their biggest test. And I'm just looking at Winsipedia, the website that compares teams versus teams over the years. And so Ohio State is 79-12 and 5 against Indiana. Indiana's longest win streak in the series is 4 games from 1903 to 1913. They played 4 times in there. Indiana won them all. Ohio State currently in the middle of the longest win streak, which is currently 28 games starting back in 1991. So,
and that doesn't include 2010, which was redacted. Obviously, that's my word for it. I know it's vacated, but
if you want to say that Ohio State or Indiana is due, I wouldn't disagree with you based on the numbers. But these are all individual teams amongst themselves, and the Buckeyes and the fans, I think, are going to be ready for this one. I know the 12 p.m. kickoff is the bane of everybody's existence, but we just came off of a week where we saw Ohio State fans in the bars at 7 a.m. and then leaving the bars at 10:45 to get to kickoff at 11:05, 11:15, and there was not a complaint in the house. Everybody is glad to be there, so go ahead and be glad to be at Ohio Stadium Saturday morning for the biggest game in the stadium of the year, and enjoy it and make an impact in the game. Like, don't grumble about it. Be loud about it in a positive way, and do your part. Like I've seen Penn State's fans and Oregon's fans do their part, and the traveling fans last week in Northwestern for Ohio State.
And I think we all understand when we say Indiana's due, we could have done this show 15 years ago and be making the same statement that Indiana's due to win one. So they will win on Saturday because they've got a good football team. And we're going to dive into the Hoosiers a little bit more with Matt Weaver from Indiana 247 Sports. Matt, great to have you. How are you doing today?
Hey, Matt.
I'm doing okay. Hey, how's it going, guys? Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Yeah, we got you. So we want to find out how good this Indiana football team is. We see the scores. We watch the highlights. Some of us watch the games at various times, and we see a line of mediocre Big Ten teams. But if you would have told me at the beginning of the season, Indiana is going to be 10-0 right now, I would have thought, okay, somebody missed a field goal here, and they lucked out here, and they got a fumble, scoop, and score there, and they won 31-28 there. I would have never seen this kind of dominance and game control out of this team.
Yeah, I mean, until the Michigan game, they've beaten everybody pretty soundly. I mean, we'll find out how good they are this Saturday. They've done their part. The schedule's the schedule. It's not really Indiana's fault that some of the Big Ten teams they played are not maybe, not that Maryland's supposed to be great or Michigan State was supposed to be great, but I think some people thought they'd be better than what they've been. Nebraska was 5-1 when they played them. Indiana beat them 56-7, and they've not won since. So I don't know if Indiana broke the Cornhuskers or what, but they've not done anything since. But this will be they've been tested some, but this will be their first real true test. I mean, this is obviously going to be an incredibly difficult game. Obviously not only is Ohio State incredibly talented, but in their stadium with, so much on the line in front of, 100,000 plus people. So we'll find out how good they are, but they've done everything they can possibly do to this point, to put themselves in a position to get into the playoff.
Matt, I will ask you this question that I asked both Ryan Day and Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator, kind of 2 parts. First of all, what do you really like about what the Ohio University transfer Curtis Rourke has brought to Indiana and the offense there? I mean, you had Penix 4 years ago, and he was just starting to scratch the surface of his Penix-like abilities. We saw it really come out, as he went on to Washington. Although 490 yards against Ohio State 4 years ago was a pretty good day too. So that's one. And then, as Archie Bunker would say, B is, okay, the guy rushed for 800 yards in 5 seasons at Ohio University, and I think ESPN says he's netted 17 so far at Indiana in 10 games. Is this because they're beating people so badly that he doesn't have to run the football and they don't want to put him in harm's way? Because that's what they told us about C.J. Stroud for 2 full years was, well, we don't need him to run. We want to keep him healthy. Or is this the secret weapon that Curt Cignetti in Indiana is holding back for the matchup game that had not materialized until this coming Saturday, that they're going to turn, because he was a run pass guy at Ohio University. I mean, he was a pretty good runner. I mean, I saw a lot of Ohio University football last few years. So he's got that in him, or is this just been kind of drowned out of him?
No, I mean, it's kind of funny. I honestly did not realize he had run for that many yards at Ohio. Probably should have known that. I always joke that when he runs, he kind of looks like a baby giraffe because it looks kind of awkward at times. Now he's effective. He's been pretty effective running the ball, but it doesn't. I think maybe once they've run like a read option where he's put the ball in the belly of the running back and then kept it. Usually when he does that, he's throwing the ball. It didn't go well. I want to say it might have been against Maryland, and they either got 1 yard or no gain. I just think he's so good at throwing the ball. And then the running game has been, where they don't really need to use the quarterback to get the running game going. The running game has been so good that it's just keep him in the pocket, try to protect him, and let him do what he does best, and that's spin the ball and get it out to guys. So I don't think they're gonna any secret strategy to run him this weekend. I think if he's running a lot, then the Indiana O-line is not playing good, and Jack Sawyer and some of those guys on the OSU defensive line are probably having a pretty good day.
With Rourke, going back to the Michigan game, 14 of 18 for 190 yards and 2 touchdowns in the first half, 3 of 10 for 16 yards with an interception in the second half. I know Elijah Surratt, I think, had 2 drops maybe in the second half there. Was that, in your opinion, just the Michigan defensive line? Because they got after him in the second half really, really well. But how do you square the 2 different halves, like really different halves in that game?
Yeah, it was really, honestly, the majority that was Michigan's defensive line kind of took over. And for me, that's the question and the concern going into this week. Can Indiana block? Because Ohio State's got a similar type as far as talent and ability and the way they can get after the quarterback. Can they block up front? Can they protect Rourke? I think if they can, I think he can make some plays. I think the passing game can make some plays. But, pressure is obviously the kryptonite for every quarterback, especially pressure right up the middle. And that's kind of what they were getting. Michigan was doing a lot of twists and stunts. It's not something Indiana hasn't seen. They just struggled with it. Now, they did have a new left guard. Drew Evans was hurt the week before the Michigan game. I think you guys have had a similar thing, a torn Achilles that happened this week for, I think, the center for OSU. Although I'm not sure that was as big of a deal as maybe some people might think. The pressure from the line was given up for Indiana was coming from all spots. It wasn't just his spot. And maybe some of it was they were getting used to working with him because, it was his first game playing significantly. But, it was the D-line for Michigan. They did a great job. Kenneth Grant and is it Mason Grant? They're good players. They're going to be NFL guys. And they've got some edge guys that are athletic. And then they were blitzing. They were doing some things. They were trying. And I would guess – I don't know how much Ohio State blitzes, but I would guess Jim Knowles is probably going to send some extra guys to try to heat up Curtis Rourke and not let him get comfortable. I would and see if in Indiana's backs, they've been good all year picking up those blitzers. They were not good against Michigan. For whatever reason, they struggled. They've had 2 weeks to kind of, iron that out, and we'll see if they have because they're going to have to do that Saturday.
I am pretty amazed at how deep the receiving core is, and I know they're all coming from James Madison and Ohio and Kent State or wherever. He's got – this is as good a group of receivers that Ohio State will have seen since Oregon. Give me talk about how dynamic and how deep they are there for Curtis Rourke, and that's not even including dumping it off to the running backs or hitting the tight end.
Yeah, Surratt's kind of been the top guy. Elijah Surratt came over from JMU. I would say the one thing that this group maybe lacks is maybe not a ton of elite speed. They're not slow, but it's, they don't have a bunch of burners. They just got guys to get open and catch the ball. But Surratt, even when he's covered well, a 50-50 ball is more like a 70-30 ball for him. Omar Cooper has had a good year. Miles Price, the transfer from Texas Tech. Miles Cross, who played with Rourke at Ohio, has been good. Keyshawn Williams from Wake Forest. All these guys have contributed. It's I don't know if there's like a bona fide stud, like a big time guy, a Jermaine Smith, but they have a bunch of guys that, you can't really focus on one. If you do, then somebody else is going to beat you. And there's been different weeks where a guy stepped up. You just don't really know who it's going to be from week to week. Surratt's probably been the most consistent, although like you mentioned against Michigan, probably his poorest game, a couple drops on passes he normally catches, but it's been a good group. They've done really well. I mean, the two leading returning receivers from last year were Donovan McCulley and EJ Williams. They both bailed a month ago. Between them, they had like 3 or 4 catches total on the entire season. So it just shows you what these guys have done coming in this year. They've been really good.
You're muted, Steve.
Very impressive to see what they've done. I mean, for my first look column, Ohio State has it looked like 5 or 6 transfers who've started this season with Howard and Downs and Josh Simmons, if you want to count him as a transfer from last year, and McLaughlin, who obviously is out now, and 4, 5, 6, whatever that number is. And then you look at Indiana, and they only start 5 or 6 guys who ever played at Indiana prior to this season. And, they've got them from, every different place. On the broadcast, they said 10, 12, 13 guys from James Madison came over, and 8, 10 of them were starting. And, as you listed off some of the different colleges, guys that played at an offensive lineman from Wisconsin, different places. It just it's remarkable, I think, in this era of complete transfer portal and free agency in college football, what they were able to assemble in 1 year. And, Cignetti is no, spring chicken. He's got this job at 63 years old. Joe Paterno coached till he was, 80 or whatever, I guess. I mean, I don't know. It just, you look at it, it feels like he has gotten to the place he was destined to be at later in his career than probably he had hoped or anybody would have hoped he'd get there. This guy's been around a long time. Somebody said he was on the NC State coaching staff that coached against Ohio State 21 years ago in Ohio Stadium, one of the most – I can't even describe the game. It was triple overtime. Phillip Rivers was the quarterback for NC State, and Cignetti was one of the assistants for Chuck Amato in that game. And, Ohio State won it like 44-38 in triple overtime. I mean, you hear that and you're like, 21 years later, this guy is coaching at Indiana. I mean, it's just been a journey, type thing for this guy. Just how has this guy done this? I mean, it's just, he's done the unthinkable. He's done the impossible. And now he's got a contract through 2031 or 32 at $8 million a year. I mean, this is unheard of.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to wrap your head around. I mean, you guys probably, well, maybe not as much at Ohio State because you get coaches and they do really well and you keep them for a number of years. But about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, when things started to go sideways for Tom Allen, you start to think about it. Hey, if they make a change, who could be a good fit? And to me, I always kind of look at it. I mean, I'm not an athletic director, but I look at it. Who would I hire if I was athletic director in Indiana? And I was looking for, when I started doing research, I was looking for a guy like at Kansas that they have with Lance Leipold. I know they haven't had a great year this year, but he started at the lower levels. He won everywhere he went. Was at Buffalo, which is like impossible to win at, and then gets a job at Kansas and has done a really good job at a place that's similar to Indiana, more of a basketball school, very little football support, never done anything on the football field. And the two names I came up with were Curt Cignetti and the guy that was at Tulane, who's at his name escapes me, who's at Houston. Willie Fritz. And the reason why I liked him is because they had won at lower levels. They went to places, and I think to me, if you can coach ball, you can coach ball. Kalen DeBoer was at, whatever it is in South Dakota NAIA school. To me, if you can coach at those lower levels, I know Chip Kelly's at a lower level, and he coached Ryan Day, at that kind of level. If you can coach, you can coach. What separated Cignetti from me was he worked for Saban at Alabama, and you mentioned at NC State, he worked for Johnny Majors at Pitt, so he had been at the Power 4 or 5 level at that time. Willie Fritz had not. He'd only been basically at smaller schools. Did I think they would be better this year? Absolutely. I thought coming in, this could be an 8-win team, maybe 9 with some breaks. I never in my wildest dreams imagined 10-0. I don't know how to describe it, except he's just a good ball coach. He has changed and flipped the culture, and I know those words get used a lot, culture, mindset, all that kind of stuff, but he really has. And I know he made some strong comments when he got hired. He's made some, press conferences, but some of it was, he had to rattle the cages of a lot of people in Indiana because, basically football was the time to was a tailgating time until basketball practice started. I mean, let's be honest. That's what people did here. And he had to kind of rattle some cages to get people going. And what I like to me, if you go into a school, he went to Indiana, PA. I know it's D2. They were awful, like 12-45 in the 5 or 6 years before he got there. They immediately win. He goes to Elon. I think they had won 8 games in 4 years. He wins 8 his first year. To me, if you can go into a place with guys that you didn't recruit, you didn't bring in, and you can win immediately, you can coach. That's coaching right there. When you can fit what you do to what the talent is you have and get the best out of those players, and that's what he's done. I mean, I've seen Urban Meyer with Jerry DiNardo talk about it. He's taken really good players, him and it's his staff too. The staff has been terrific. They've taken really good to really good players and made them really good to great. And they've coached them up and developed them. I mean, they're not going to have probably a ton of NFL guys off this roster. There are some, but I mean, they've made these guys really good, and it helps you have an older team. You brought in a lot of 1-year guys, and this is where the portal helps. I mean, they had over 40 guys go in the portal. When Tom Allen got fired, he had to go to the portal. I mean, he had no chance. I mean, this roster was gutted. They had 10 offensive starters in the portal on the day he was hired. I mean, he had to go to the portal, and some of these guys came back, but he did a great job recruiting the portal. He's going to have to do it again for next year. Not as big, but it's still going to be a fairly big portal class. And we'll see how it goes. But the practices are efficient. I mean, they'll practice practice has been close since mid-August, but they'll practice less than 2 hours but it's real fast. It's efficient. I don't know how Ohio State does it. For years, when I went to an IU practice, they had a clock at the end of the field. I put my hand out. At the end of the field, it would say period 12 or period whatever, counting down. There's no clock. They just know when to go to the next thing. It's really kind of remarkable to watch him in practice. He doesn't say a lot. He's not a big screamer or yeller. He kind of stands off. He's like a CEO. The coaches do most of the coaching. He kind of watches. Not saying he doesn't do any coaching, but Tom Allen was all over the place, yelling through a blowhorn, yelling all the time. He always knew where Tom Allen was. I'll go to a practice, and I don't know where Cignetti is half the time. He's just kind of low-key that way. He'll say it. My coach's job is to coach the players. My job is to coach my coaches and to run the program, and that's what he does, and it's worked. Are they going to be 10-0 every year? And probably not. I mean, let's be honest. This has been a special season, but I do think he has significantly raised the floor of what Indiana can do with him as the coach.
Mm-hmm. I think, because he's at Indiana, and I'll just say this, he reminds me a little bit of Knight, and not the negative things about Knight, being, abusive to people and treating people miserably, just the no nonsense, no BS. It's all about whatever is the main thing is the main thing, and there is no other thing. This is what we are all working for. This is it. There is no hoo-ha. There is no excitement. You see Jenny Dell try to talk to him and give some overarching assessment of, what you've accomplished and achieved, a minute after they get past Michigan, and he's just like, this is really something, next thing up, let's go. And so I think that really has served him well. So to me, in a sense, it's been refreshing. I've watched Ohio State in the Big Ten since I was 6 years old. So for almost 50 years. And, you can count the number of really good Indiana teams probably on one hand in that time. And this guy has brought Indiana to the forefront of college football, and something that just doesn't even seem possible. I think the only other thing I would ask about is their defense. And I noticed that their defensive front has been very active, very productive, perhaps a function of some of the teams they've played. I don't know what's your thought about the defense and how that matchup against Howard, the great receivers, the running backs, the running game, the offensive line. What does that look like, I guess, in your mind this week?
Well, it's going to be huge. I mean, I said this so many times. I mean, I guess I'm kind of old school. I mean, football's changed so much over the years. It's become, when I was younger, Bill Mallory's in Indiana, everything was played in between the tackles. This has become such a perimeter game. Everything's played outside the numbers. You have these great athletes. That's why receivers get paid in the NFL now and running backs don't. I mean, that's just where the game's gone. But I still believe the game is won up front. I mean, Ohio State's been good for years and years and years. Alabama, name the school, because they're good up front. yes, you got great quarterbacks, you've got great skill players, but those guys don't matter if you can't block. Kevin Wilson, who was there for years, would always tell me when he was a coach at Indiana, we had talked one-on-one. Matt, I can draw up all these great plays. If we can't block it, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? You got to be able to block, be able to run this stuff. So I think football still went up for it, and that's where this game, I think, ultimately is going to come down to. Can Indiana get after Howard? Can they make him uncomfortable? Can they slow down Judkins and Travion Henderson? You know, they're not going to stop Ohio State. Ohio State's too good. But can you make it harder for them to score? You can't have these big, huge, explosive plays, and they get down the red zone. Can you maybe hold them some field goals instead of touchdowns? But that's, McCall Kamara came over from JMU, has been awesome. I mean, I think he's right at the top in tackles for loss and sacks. He's not your prototypical. I mean, he doesn't really look the part. He's like 6'1", maybe 265. So he's not like he's not the measurements that the NFL is looking for. He's a really good player, plays his tail off. Linnell Carr on the other side was here last year, a transfer from West Virginia that came in before the 23 season. He's been good. And then James Carpenter, CJ West from Kent State. I mean, Kent State's bad at football, but CJ West is a good player. He's really good, and he's really helped Indiana. So they're a bit thin up front. And when I say that, I mean they rely on basically about 5 or 6 guys. Kamara is probably going to play most of this game. They'll rotate in a little bit, but they kind of ride these guys, and they have all year. That's the other thing that's helped Indiana. They've been very fortunate with injuries. I mean, other than Drew Evans, they've not lost anybody of note. Knock on wood, that keeps up. But they've been very fortunate. They played a number of snaps. A lot of guys have played a lot of snaps. So it's going to be the key to the game. They're going to have to slow down Ohio State, run the ball a little bit, and then hopefully, they can get after Howard, get him maybe into some third and longs, maybe uncomfortable situations, and maybe get him to make a mistake or two. He's played so well. It's not going to be easy, but to me, that's kind of the key to the game. It's going to come down up front on both sides of the ball.
Tony, anything else you'd like to hear out of Matt?
I was talking with somebody about Indiana's defensive front and the defense as a whole, the front seven. They just, as I was told, they do a bunch of crazy stuff, and I think a lot of that crazy stuff will become even more effective against a brand new center. So I think that's going to be a huge thing to watch in this game, as whoever it is at center trying to deal with everything that Indiana is doing, and knowing that I just wonder how much newness do you think we see from Indiana based on, one, everybody always holds stuff back for Ohio State, and two, now you're dealing with a new center. Wouldn't you expect them to dial up something even different for that reason as well? Or do you need to, if everything else that you've been doing has been effective? Yeah.
Brian Haynes is the D coordinator. He's actually, he was on the staff there. He was at Indiana as a GA. I think he was on there. I can't remember the year, but he's a GA. I believe he's from Ohio. He's done a great job. I think he's going to be a head coach one day, maybe sooner rather than later. They don't blitz a ton. They will blitz some, but I could see them, maybe sending a Jalen Walker and Aiden Fisher kind of in that A gap by the center, because like you mentioned, you're going to have a new guy. Communication could be an issue. I mean, it could be where these guys aren't used to working together. I mean, you guys know an offensive line is not about 5 players. It's one unit. It's 5 guys working in harmony. And Indiana until Michigan, their first team O-line, every snap that the first team offense was on the field, they were on the field. It was really quite remarkable. They've not missed one snap until that game. So it's a change. I could see them trying some new things. I mean, I think they're going to do what they do. Now, they have had 2 weeks, so who knows? There might be a kind of a monkey wrench type of thing. Maybe they throw a little bit of the kitchen sink at them. I wonder if if there's any. They haven't really run a ton of trick plays. They've had a couple halfback tosses that when we saw them in fall camp, they worked perfectly. They get them in the game, and they did not work at all. So who knows? Maybe there's something, if you still had a McCauley, Don McCauley was a quarterback in high school, quarterback his first year. Maybe you would do something with him where you maybe have him throw the ball. I think they did that at Michigan a couple of years ago. Obviously, you don't have him, but it'll be interesting to see if they do something, especially if it's a game where 1 or 2 plays, if it does come down to it, where it's a close game in the fourth quarter, and if you can get a big score or get a big play that could really help you, it'll be interesting. But I think defensively they'll do what they do, but they may try some things if they know that there's a new center and it could cause some problems for Ohio State as far as, communication and protection.
You can catch Matt Weaver's work at Indiana 247 Sports. You see his X handle right there. Follow him with everything that he reports on Indiana athletics. Anything in particular, Matt, that you're working on this week that you want to point people to?
Just the normal stuff. I mean, I'll be talking to or doing a question exchange with Patrick. I think you guys and doing his little things. I think we're doing that tomorrow. That he does for you guys is the 247 site. But actually, I'm actually kind of working on some recruiting stuff. It's a little bit of a slow time in recruiting just because it was a season going on. But yeah, we're pumping out as much as we can. Obviously, this is new for us. I mean, Indiana's had a couple good years, but this is nothing like this. Where I know for you guys it's old hat, but for us, we're kind of finding our way a little bit.
Go crank out that Juju Lewis content.
That's been shelved. I had a story in the admin for about 2 weeks about him visiting, and it got shelved.
I joked with your guy Jeff Rabjohns, who I've known for almost 20 years now, back to the Mike Conley and Greg Oden Jr. saga in the mid 2000s. That because he was covering preps back then for the Indianapolis Star. Now, obviously, he's helping to run your guys' site there, pigs.com, which is the preeminent Indiana website and one of the best college fan websites that exists on the face of our planet. But I think that he's going to enjoy having ranked teams in both football and basketball going forward. And you guys are now a 2-sport school, so that's exciting.
Hopefully, yeah. Rabbi will be over with our me and Rabbi and Jared Kelly from our site will all be over on Saturday. So I'm sorry you've known Rabbi for that long. That's a tough deal. No, he's a good dude. He's great to work for and great to work with.
The great Mike Whisperer. He knew everything that was going on as it was happening. So.
Yeah, he's very good at his job.
Yep.
Well, like you say, Matt, it's a whole new ball game for Indiana. It's old hat for Ohio State. Every time I spit out the records, I think, this has been stated, about 10,000 times for Ohio State being 9-1. But when you match it up against Indiana 10-0, that's a first time ever. So it's just it's going to be a sight to behold. And, of course, then comes the resume matchups after that, depending on how Indiana shows up in Columbus. Matt, we appreciate you stopping by. It was great to have you.
Yep, thanks a lot, Matt. Really appreciate it.
No problem, guys. And hopefully I'll see you guys on Saturday.
Yep, there you go.
All right. That's it.
I think we did it. We've set the scene. That the line opened at 11.5, and it's now 13.5. Although I wonder, when the markets understand that Ohio State's without their center, if it'll come back down a point or so. But looking at the over/under in the 51-52 range, they're thinking like a 32-19 type game if you base it off what the lines are, and that's in the realm of what I was thinking, like a 34-17, something like that. And, a solid win. I just think that Ohio State last week against Northwestern, which we didn't talk at all about our Wrigley experience or any of that, but
amazing.
To me, it was just a mind-blowing experience to see Buckeye Nation take over Wrigley Field to the level that they did. It was a tale of two games. The first 20 minutes were basically a standoff, and Northwestern was ahead 7-0. And then Ohio State, aided by a punt snap that went over the punter's head. Sometimes you need a break. And Ohio State, was able to block the punt and got a cheap touchdown out of that. And that was basically it. I mean, Northwestern kind of crawled into the fetal position at that moment. And Northwestern converted 4 of their first 5 third downs. And we're playing Ohio State dead even, toe-to-toe, lockstep for 20 minutes. And then the last 40 minutes of the game, they were 2 of 11 on third down. And really, had a couple scoring threats, but nothing too serious the rest of the way. And, the Ohio State defense playing lights out. If you take out that pick 6 by Penn State, Ohio State's only given up, I think, 7.8 points per game over the last 4 games. And you're going to win a lot of football games if you only give up a touchdown each week. I think Indiana will probably get a little bit more than that this week. But, it should be one hell of a game. Saturday at noon, high noon on Fox. And, I had somebody in our house here the other day, a lady who had season tickets, and she said, I give off some of my tickets to my friend, and I just threw in Indiana for the hell of it back before the season. And now I'm like really regretting that I gave those to my friend. And I'm like, I bet you are, lady. I bet you are. So, yeah, I think the market that I saw the other day was if you want to just go as yourself, one person, you can get into the stadium for $100 because there's plenty of single tickets available. But if you and a friend want to go and sit together to buy a pair, they're $200 a piece, $400 for the pair. So, this is a prime ticket this weekend.
All right. Everybody catch Tony at BuckeyeHuddle.com, and the Buckeye Weekly podcast just dropped. So you can go directly from here. Buckeye Weekly podcast. You might as well just head on over there and get saturated on Ohio State, Indiana. And of course, catch Steve at bucknuts.com. Guys, enjoy the game on Saturday, and we'll make it on back here next week.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Hopefully we have happy things to talk about. We'll